Have they spent $80 billion not on solving your problems, not on fixing the system, not on building your future? No, this money was poured into something that at first glance looked like progress, looked like innovation, looked like a breakthrough. But here's the truth, no one is saying loud enough, it didn't change what actually matters. While you were working harder, while you were trying to stay ahead, while you were fighting to build something real, they were burning billions on something that distracted, divided, and delayed real impact. And the cost, it's not just money, it's time, it's an opportunity. It's your future. Because every dollar spent in the wrong direction is a dollar stolen from the right one. So the real question isn't why did they spend it? The real question is what could have happened if they didn't? It always begins with something that looks like progress. A new system, a bold investment, a massive number that signals movement. $80 billion. Creates the illusion that something meaningful must be happening. And for many men, progress is tied to proof results, structure, direction. When they see scale, they assume purpose. But from a woman's perspective, progress isn't measured by how much is spent, it's measured by what actually changes. And that gap between what looks like movement and what feels like meaning is where trust quietly starts to break. It becomes dangerous when effort replaces intention. Men are wired to act, to build, to solve, so when they see resources being deployed, they instinctively respect the motion. But women often sense what's missing beneath the motion, the emotional intelligence, the clarity of why, the human impact. What looks like strength to one can feel like emptiness to another. And when billions are spent without aligning both logic and meaning, it doesn't just waste money, it creates silent frustration. It reveals something deeper about how we define value. Men often chase visible wins, have measurable outcomes, things that can be pointed to and proven. Women more often look for alignment, connection, and purpose behind those wins. When progress becomes performative, when it's about appearing effective rather than being effective, it disconnects both perspectives. And that disconnection is where real loss begins. It starts the moment money begins to move faster than meaning. $80 billion doesn't just represent power, it represents direction, and men are conditioned to respect direction when it's backed by action. Movement feels like control, like leadership, like progress unfolding in real time. But from a woman's perspective, movement without meaning feels hollow, like watching energy being spent with no emotional or human return. And when intention is missing, the scale of the investment only magnifies the emptiness behind it. It becomes more complicated when action replaces understanding. Men often find identity in doing and fixing and pushing forward even when the purpose isn't fully clear, because stopping feels like failure. But women tend to question the why before they validate the how, sensing when something lacks depth or alignment. When billions are spent just to keep momentum alive, it creates a disconnect between visible effort and felt impact. What looks like strength on the surface can quietly register as misdirection underneath. It exposes a deeper tension between control and connection. Men may see money in motion as proof that something is being handled, that leadership is present. Women often read beyond the motion, looking for intention, awareness, and care behind the decisions. When money moves without meaning, it doesn't just lose value, it erodes trust, creating a space where neither perspective fully feels seen or understood. It's never the 80 billion you see that does the real damage. The visible number feels massive, almost overwhelming, and for many men, scale like that signals importance, impact, have dominance over a problem. They're taught to measure cost in what can be counted, tracked, justified. But from a woman's perspective, the deeper cost lies in what isn't visible, the emotional toll, the missed connections, the quiet absence of real change. And that invisible layer is where the true weight begins to settle. It grows in the space between action and impact. Men often focus on what was done, the effort invested, the resources committed, because action feels like progress. But women tend to feel what wasn't done, what wasn't considered, what didn't land where it mattered most. When billions are spent without meaningful outcomes, it creates a silent tension between visible effort and invisible disappointment. One side points to the work, the other feels the gap left behind. It reveals itself in what could have been built instead. Men may calculate lost opportunities in terms of strategy and outcomes, while women often sense the human potential that was never realized the lives. That could have improved, the stability that could have formed, the trust that could have deepened. When the unseen cost continues to rise, it doesn't just drain resources, it quietly reshapes how both perspectives begin to define value. It often begins with something that looks revolutionary. A bold idea, a new system, a massive investment that promises to change everything. $80 billion signals innovation at a scale that's hard to question. And for many men, innovation represents dominance, forward motion, the ability to stay ahead. They're drawn to what's new because it feels like control over the future. But from a woman's perspective, not everything new feels meaningful. When innovation lacks depth, it doesn't inspire, it distracts, pulling attention away from what actually matters. It becomes a problem when novelty replaces necessity. Men are wired to chase solutions, to build, to fix, and innovation gives them a sense of purpose, even when the problem isn't clearly defined. Movement feels productive, even when it's misaligned. But women tend to sense when something is solving the wrong problem, when energy is being poured into what looks impressive instead of what feels essential. What appears as progress on the surface can feel like avoidance underneath. It exposes the difference between looking effective and being effective. Men often value outcomes that can be measured, showcased, and scaled, while women look for impact that can be felt, sustained, and trusted. When billions are spent on innovation that distracts rather than solves, it creates a divide between action and meaning, leaving both perspectives questioning what was really achieved. It's never the ones writing the checks who feel the real weight. $80 billion can move through systems, through decisions, through strategies, and for many men that movement signals authority, control, the ability to take charge and execute. They see leadership in action, resources being deployed, problems being handled. But from a woman's perspective, the question isn't who controls the money, it's who carries the consequences when that control lacks care. And more often than not, it's the people far removed from the decision who absorb the impact. It shows up in the pressure no one talks about. Men are conditioned to provide, to protect, to hold the line, even when the system around them is misaligned. When billions are misdirected, the burden doesn't disappear, it shifts downward. It lands on the shoulders of men trying to make sense of rising expectations with shrinking support. Women, in turn, feel the emotional weight of that pressure, the stress, the distance, the silent frustration that enters homes and relationships. What looks like a financial decision at the top becomes a psychological strain at the bottom. It reveals itself in the imbalance between power and responsibility. Men may respect the hierarchy that moves money, believing those at the top must know what they're doing, while women often question whether those decisions truly reflect the needs of real people. When the outcomes fail to match the scale of the investment, both perspectives begin to feel the disconnect, one through the weight of responsibility, the other through the absence of empathy. It becomes impossible to ignore when you start asking what $80 billion could have actually built. For many men, building is identity, it's proof of purpose, of impact, of leaving something tangible behind. They measure worth in structures created, systems improved, lives made more stable through action. But when that level of resource is spent without meaningful return, it creates a quiet tension, a sense that effort was misplaced, that something real was sacrificed for something that only looked significant. It takes on a different weight when you see it through a woman's lens. Women often think in terms of people before systems, connection before scale, meaning before movement, where men might see lost infrastructure or missed strategic gains. Women often see the human side of what could have been built: stronger families, safer environments, deeper trust within communities. The absence isn't just structural, it's emotional, relational, something that can't simply be measured in numbers. It begins to expose the gap between intention and impact. Men are driven to execute, to move forward, to make decisions even in uncertainty, because standing still feels like failure. But women tend to pause and question whether the direction itself is aligned, whether what's being built actually serves the people it's meant to impact. When billions are poured into the wrong places, it doesn't just waste opportunity, it highlights how easily action can outpace awareness. It forces a deeper reflection on what we truly define as progress. Men may look at what could have been built in terms of legacy, scale, and visible success, while women often look at what could have been felt security, connection, lasting change in everyday lives. And in that contrast, the real loss becomes clearer, not just in what wasn't created, but in what was never even considered.